Hey guys, so in today's video we're going to be going over the concept of objects and classes in Java. So let's kind of go back to our student example, right? Let's say I'm teaching a math class and I want to model that in my Java program. So I want to have all of my students in my class, right? So with the information we have so far, maybe we would create our first student by saying maybe student 1. And maybe here we would put their name, like let's say we have Jack. And then we might have his ID. So let's say his ID is something like this. And maybe some more information like his GPA or his grade or his age. And then I have a pretty well-sized class. So I don't have just one student, I've got 25 students. So we'd be copy-pasting this information, and then maybe we'd have to change every single variable name and all the values. And this would be repetitive code, it would be tedious code, and it also would be kind of unorganized, right? Because basically, even though each student is unique in that they have a unique ID and they have a unique name, they still have the same basic information. Every student is going to have a name, and every student is going to have an ID, and every student is going to have an age, right? So that's where objects and classes come in. Now we've kind of caught a glimpse of what a class is, right? Here we see public class main, or in our variables, public class variables, right? So a class in Java is basically the blueprint of an object. So kind of like how I was saying that every student is going to have the same basic information, we could create a student class by going to new and then class, and we would call it student. And this would be the blueprint for all of the students that I'll be creating and adding to my math class, right? And so here we would populate this class with two things. First, their properties, right? So this is like their name and their age and their ID, all of that information that every student is going to have, will have variables for those. And then the second thing is their functions. So for example, as a student, you will be doing your homework or you'll be walking to class, right? So these are things that you would be doing. So that's what a class will have. It's a blueprint of creating your objects. And then the object itself is when you create an actual student and give the student their name and their age, right? So you're creating an instance of this student class and populating it with the information that's specific to each student. So once you actually create it, that's when you've made an object, and it's an object of type student, and it has all the specific information. So the syntax for actually creating a new object is, let's say, so as we know, like with variables, we have to specify the data type. So in this case, our object kind of becomes the type. So we want to create a new student. And we've already created our student class here, so it knows to refer to this. And then we're going to give this student variable a name. So again, when you're creating objects, it's almost like you're creating another variable. It's just that you can do more with it, right? Like how with int variables, because you specified its data type is int, then now you can add numbers to that variable or subtract numbers to that variable. So similarly, because we're using a object, we've created a class called student, and now we're creating an instance of it, whatever stuff we can do, whatever we've specified inside this class, we can do all of that since we specified now our type is this object student. So we can give it a name, and let's say we're just going to do student 1. So we talked about this in arrays, and now it's going to be more concrete with objects, but you're going to use the new keyword. And that's where you'll see the difference between the basic data types we talked about versus objects, right? So in objects, when you're creating it, you have to use a new keyword, and then you do student parentheses and semicolon. And we're going to be diving deep into what all this means and what we can actually put inside our student class. But basically what we just did is we created an object, and that object's name is student 1, and it's an instance of this student class. And our class is here. And now we're going to be populating our class with the different pieces of information. And Objects and classes are really fundamental to Java because Java is an object-oriented programming language. So that means that you're going to be creating your own objects, or you're going to be creating instances of already existing classes and then creating a whole application from there. So maybe another example to kind of solidify this idea of a class and creating an instance of it is like with Google Accounts, right? When you create a Google account, it asks you to put in specific information. And all of us have to put in the same type of information, like what's your username going to be, and what's your password going to be, and what's the birthday. So maybe we'll have a class called Google Account. And then the object itself is when I create my Google account. So I'm putting in my username and my password and my birthday. And there we created an instance of the Google account class that has specific information. And that becomes the object. And when you create your Google account and you're putting in your username / email ID or your password or your birthday, then we just created another instance of the Google account class, and now that's an object, and your instance is now an object. So that's kind of how classes and objects work in Java. And in the next video, we're going to be going over how and what we can actually put inside a class. I'll see you guys in the next video.